My name is Christian. I'm from the company Holisticon, and we partner today with Michael from Taos, New Mexico, in the US of A. And we are bringing to you a webinar series, 4 webinars with the topic Leadership Agility. And we are very excited to have Michael with us because we can learn a lot from him. We have a few colleagues of Holisticon present too. Most of us have the Holisticon logo at the end. So if you have any questions about our company or want to contact us in any way, just chat us privately. Maret is going to moderate the meeting, to be the host. I'm just doing
Hello, everyone.
This is Maret. She's going to tell you what's going to happen next and everything special we know, and she's going to post some infos into the chat from time to time. As always, we're going to see that we have a very interactive experience, so be prepared to have to work a little bit. If you have something like a pen and a paper handy, it's cool. I can't see it with my virtual background. And we're going to be in breakout rooms too from time to time. But Marit will tell us exactly when and how we will do what. So yeah, Holisticon, together with Michael Hamman. Holisticon is a company based in Germany. We have offices in Hamburg and Hanover, and we are doing IT and management consulting. So if you have any problems in this area, please contact us. We are going to help you. And if you need more input about leadership and leadership agility, this will come from Michael. And now I'm handing over to you, Michael. Maybe start with a short introduction of yourself. I won't say anything on your person. I'm just going to hand it over to you now. And for the rest of you, have a nice meeting. Have a fun with the webinar.
Great. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Christian, and thank you, Maret. Welcome, everybody. Some of you I probably know. In fact, I see some familiar faces already. And I don't see all your faces, just so you know, Zoom only allows me to see a certain number of you. And but for those of you I don't see, welcome. Thank you for being here. We'll be here together for 90 minutes for this session. And I want to just start off by saying just briefly something about myself. So I come from a background in organization development and coaching and professional coaching. And I started into the Agile world in the late 90s. I read every single book on Agile at the time because there were only about 4. And from the very beginning, I have integrated systems thinking, leadership development, human development, relationship systems coaching into my work in the Agile space. So that's been my approach from the very beginning. And I started out coaching large enterprises. And what I discovered very quickly is how the mindset, the prevailing mindset of people they weren't prepared to actually do Agile. And in order to do Agile, I discovered that people had to be Agile. And then the question became, well, what does that mean? And we give lip service to that, but we oftentimes we don't really know how to fully occupy that. So I've been very active in bringing in insights and research from the field of adult development, leadership development, executive coaching, and transformative education, which is something in which I have a long, long background. And so in the last many years, I've been focusing specifically on leadership development, or specifically on leadership agility. And so I want to share some thoughts with you about that today, and to set us up to move forward for 4 sessions. I think we have 1 each week. Is that correct? Yes. Yes, I'm seeing nodding heads. Yes. So if you can attend all 4, that would be great. You'll get the fuller picture of what I am talking about, or what we're talking about here, in terms of leadership agility and what it takes to grow the capacity for leadership agility, both within ourselves and in people around us. So I'm gonna move into sharing my screen. I generally don't like to do this, and I'll try to keep it somewhat minimum. But I want to, since we're going to be moving through some ideas fairly quickly right now, it's helpful for people to kind of follow along. So I'm going to put my screen up, and just give me a second to set this up. And how is that looking? Are you able to see? You should see a white screen. Okay, good. So what I want to do now is I just want to say something about the series itself. So today, we're going to focus on I want to give you an overview of this. And incidentally, part of what we'll be doing in in every session is I'll be interacting with you. So you'll have breakout sessions, but I'll also be interacting with you. So I don't want this to be overly theoretical. I want you to start to begin to think about applying this in your own life. So this is useless if it's just a theoretical exercise. All right. So today is going to be an overview of kind of like where we're going and what this is all about and how I'm thinking about leadership agility. Then I want to get to one of the key distinctions in this, which is a shift in mindset from predict and plan to sense and respond. And then finally, I want to just say briefly about the three territories that we'll be covering over the course of the next 4 sessions. Then in session 2, we'll be focusing specifically in the territory of mindset. Like what's the nature of mind? What's the nature of our minds such that we find ourselves behaving in ways that are not necessarily congruent with what we say we're committed to? So that's the second session. The third session, we're going to dive into the territory of relationship. For the most part, I would submit that we suck at relationship and communication. So we want to dive into what do we mean by relationship, specifically in a VUCA world, specifically as it relates to our own leadership agility. And then finally, in the fourth session, we're going to be looking at the territory of organizational influence. Okay, so let's jump in. So I want to say now, leadership is a really loaded word. And like any loaded weapon, we want to be clear about, how we want to use it. And so I'm going to be using leadership in a couple of different ways in this whole series. One way is the more common way, which is the position of organizational leadership. So somebody has a role as a manager, as an executive leader, as a director. And so they have some accountability that has to do with the organization in which they lead. So that's one way, and the most common way of talking about leadership. Another way to talk about leadership, and the way that I want to bring more focus to, is what I'm calling an everywhere leadership. A leadership which is defined as that which emerges when it's called for. Incidentally, if you haven't figured it out yet, I'm going to be inviting you to think through things. So I say things in strange ways, but I say it very deliberately. All right. So, so everywhere leadership is a leadership which emerges in the moment when it is needed. So it's not to say that we're not denying the existence and the importance of organizational leadership. I just want to make this fine distinction here. So when we talk about everywhere leadership, we're asking the question, who is a leader? And in the domain of everywhere leadership, I use the word small L leadership as distinct from big L leadership, which big L leadership is people in positions of management or leadership. So who is a leader within the context of everywhere leadership? First of all, it's anyone willing to take responsibility for their world and able and willing to influence others in creating that world. So I don't mean blaming myself. So we live in a VUCA world. VUCA meaning volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. That's the nature of the world that we live in. We tend to think that we live in a different kind of world, and we'll come to that in a moment. Um, but as COVID-19 tells us, reminds us that we live in a world that's inherently unpredictable, complex, and ambiguous. So when we look at taking responsibility for our world, it's not blaming myself, but it's being willing to look to see in what way can I bring improvement in the world around me. Whether I'm a software developer who cares about the quality of the software code on my team, or I'm an executive leader and I want to have my company truly make a difference in the world. So that's what I mean by taking responsibility. The second item here is a leader is anyone who is guided by a deep inner compass. So a sense of profound, a sense of profound purpose in the world. And it doesn't have to be a big deal. It could just be, I'm a software developer on my team, and I really care about the quality of code on my team. I mean, I really care about that. Like I wake up lit up by that sense of purpose. For me, my sense of purpose is contributing to the transformation of human consciousness and culture. So that's the thing I wake up to. But it's something we wake up to. We don't have to like remember what is it that I care about? What is it that I'm committed to? So that's the second sort of aspect of who is a leader. And the third and final one is a leader is anyone willing to recognize and evolve beyond the limitations of their current ways of seeing themselves, seeing the world, seeing others, being willing to recognize our blind spot and willing to move beyond the limitations of the blind spot. See, a basic tenet of leadership agility is a recognition that we are determined by the way we think, by the way we see the world. And to the degree that we are unaware of that, it becomes a blind spot. And that blind spot dictates our capacity for influence of other people, our capacity to be able to even see realistically what's going on around us. So these are the three things that I say who is a leader. By the way, I don't claim to have the corner on leadership here. This is just the way that I think about it because I have found it useful in the way that I work with people. So don't take this as God's given truth or Buddha's given truth or whoever's given truth, right? So the other thing is that I want to say something about the big L leader, which is that leader who has a position in an organization, a leadership or management role in the organization. It's all of the stuff we just said, plus it's anyone whose job is to grow other small L leaders. So a leader in an organization may have other jobs, may have other roles, but within the context of developing leadership agility, the role of the positional leadership is to create organizational conditions such that they give rise to the emergence of small L leaders throughout the organization. Okay, put your thumbs up if we're so far so good. So far so good. Actually, I can't even see it, everybody. Okay, I'm just going to charge through. All right, so I want to get to the kind of the second big idea. There are essentially three big ideas that we're going to cover. Actually, really two big ideas and then one small idea. The second big idea is that what we're talking about here is a shift from predict and plan to sense and respond. And I want to say what I mean by that. So, a predict and plan mindset sees the world in terms of, it understands the world as something that we can predict, and on the basis of that prediction, we can make a plan. Now, what I'm not saying here is that um, uh, it's only about making plans, and we'll come to that in just a moment. A predict and plan mindset is the deep metaphysical inner assumption that the world is inherently predictable, and on the basis of that prediction, we make plans. And when things don't turn out the way we predict or the way that we want, we get upset. And that upset shows up in lots and lots of different ways. Now, lest you think that you are not constituted by this sort of predict and plan mindset, I invite you to think again, and we'll invite you in just a moment to actually think fairly deeply into that. So, we're talking about a shift from a predict and plan mindset to what I'm calling a sense and respond mindset. And with a sense and respond mindset, we recognize that we cannot predict the future. It doesn't necessarily mean we can never predict the future, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we're in an ocean of chaos. But what it means is that we don't necessarily count on the world being predictable. We count on that the world is uncertain, is unpredictable. It is complex. There are things that we can't quite see that escape our grasp. And in the face of that, which by the way is what I mean by a VUCA world, in the face of a VUCA world, we can sense what's happening in the moment and respond in a way that brings about greater capability, even in the face of VUCA. So it's like being able to stand in the face of the unpredictability and still commit to action, which has the capacity to move something forward anyways. All right. Now, I'm not saying that coming from a sense and respond mindset that we don't make predictions and we don't make plans. It's just that we recognize that we can't necessarily count on the world being the way that we assume that it is when we make those plans. And so we're able to adapt, we're able to dance with what's happening in the moment. So, so I want to invite you to think about this. Sorry. So we're going to move into a breakout in just a moment. And there's a question here. Yeah, sorry.
Is there a question in the chat?
Well, here's a question on the screen. Oh, yeah. Is there so we could take a question if it's a question like you need to be able to understand something in order to proceed. So we can take a question like that, or a couple like that. Is that okay, Maret?
Yeah.
Okay. So who has such a question?
I have one.
Yep. Hello.
Shaheen here.
Oh, Shaheen.
Hi.
Hey, good
How
to
are
see
you?
Yeah, good.
So we are talking about sense and respond. Is there before the responding, is there anything else? Sense and maybe you don't even know how to absorb it, how to compile that challenge that you have in hand.
Yeah. So you're jumping into something that that would take a deeper dive. And my answer to that question is yes, there is something in between sensing and responding, which is making sense. So I'll just say something briefly about that. That sense and respond, we're always in the process of making sense of our experience at any given moment. And all of that happens beyond our ability to be aware. We're not aware of the sense making, like we're in this very moment. The mind is very busy trying to make sense of what's going on in this very moment. And the equipment that our minds have to do that sense making is oftentimes insufficiently complex for what's going on around us. And that's something we're going to dive into much more deeply in the next session. But suffice to say right now, what we're talking about is that for the most part, we live in a predict and plan mindset. Even if we say that we are sense and respond, for the most part, we operate in a predict and plan mindset. Okay, thank you, Shaheen. Is there any other question that needs to get dealt with in order to be able to move? Because we're going to move to the breakout in just a moment. And do you see any other questions, Marat?
We have a question in the chat from Eric, Idaho. Is it our human nature that when under stress, we move to predict and plan?
Yes, but not necessarily only under stress, right? So stress is one of the triggers that triggers us more deeply into predict and plan. But it's not the only one. Pride is another one. Satisfaction is another one. And as I said a moment ago with Shaheen, we'll dive more deeply into the sort of inner operating system of the predict and plan versus sense and respond mindset. But for now, we want to begin to kind of grapple with this for ourselves in our own leadership. And so here's the question: where in your leadership, and it doesn't matter whether or not you have a job as a manager or leader, almost every moment in your life, you are exercising some kind of leadership in the sense that we define it over to the other side of the screen. Where in your leadership do you resort to predict and plan when what is being called for is sense and respond? Be honest. Please be honest, because I can tell you, as much as I work with this stuff on a day-to-day basis and have been working with this stuff for years, I still operate very often in a predict and plan. And COVID has certainly brought me face to face in confronting that part of myself. So I invite you to confront this for yourself. So we'll start with solo and then in a group, Marat, and you'll take us through how we're going to do that.
Yes, thank you for the input, Michael, and also thank you for the question and the prompt. I'm seeing we also have some more questions in the chat, but we'll come back to these later, or maybe you'll also have the chance to discuss these in your breakout sessions. But first, you'll ponder on this question solo. We'll give you 1 minute to make your own thoughts on the question Michael just gave you. Where in your leadership do you resort to predict and plan when what is being called for is sense and response? So I'll take the time and then give you a cue when the time is over, and then Christian will shift you to the breakout rooms, and I will give you, before that, I will give you instructions on the next steps, which you will have then in the breakout rooms.
Right. So I just want to be just clear. So my request is that people carry this question into the breakout room. So don't have this be a general discussion about leadership, because it's not going to be very useful for you. I would assert. I believe it's going to be more useful for you to be honest with each other in relation to this question.
Yeah, thank you for the specification, Michael. That's important. Just take this question with you to the breakout room. So now you have time to think on your own and then make your thoughts and prepare for the upcoming discussion. I start the time. 1 minute starts now. Please come to an end. If you took some notes, just finish your notes or finish the thought in your head. This was the preparation for the upcoming conversation you'll have in the breakout rooms. And I will post the upcoming structure in the chat. We'll have a conversation cafe. And this will be as follows. Like perhaps many of you already know liberating structures. For those of you who don't, you go into groups of 5 and then discuss on the following questions and you on the question we just had. And we have 2 rounds. So you have some time and the opportunity to refine your thoughts on the question. And you'll have 5 minutes each round, so one minute per person, every person, and only one person at a time will be talking. So like when one person is talking, the other ones will mute themselves and listen carefully. And we don't have the opportunity to time box throughout the breakout rooms. We can only give you a prompt when the breakout rooms will be about to finish and you will have to come back. So please take care of the time boxing yourselves. We will meet again roughly around 3:35 p.m. Central European time. So maybe you can just calculate the times for yourself for your time zone. And you do the time boxing, like you will have around like 10, 12 minutes. We will give you some more time if needed. Are there any questions about the structure? If not, I don't see anything in the chat, so I will ask Christian. Christian, are you ready?
Welcome back. So Maret has told me that there are some questions in the chat window, and we may or may not get to these questions in the near future, but if not, we'll get to some of them at least during the Q&A. But right now, what I want to do is I want to find out, what did you see in the work that you just now did? So the question was to examine your own leadership and to notice when you tend to fall into predict and plan, when what is being called for is sense and respond. So the way this will work is just, raise your hand and I will speak with you. Tamara.
Hi.
How do I say your name?
Tamara.
Tamara. Okay, good, Tamara. So thank you. Thank you for being the first brave one. So what did you come up with?
I noticed that if I enter a company not being mindful, or I'm very tired or stressed, then I tend to go into predict and plan. So the more I'm aware and conscious of me and going with an open mind and being mindful, then I can really sense into what's happening and what it needs.
Yeah. What if I were to suggest, so I'm going to be a bit provocative.
Go for it.
Is that right? So what if it were the case that there may be times when you fall into predict and plan and you don't quite notice it? Like,
yeah, I've done that.
Yeah. So, you've noticed it after the fact.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
And what would you say is, if you look back at one such moment, what is it that's happening that has you be in a predict and plan place? And, because we want to start to look at a little bit at the anatomy of that.
Mm-hmm. I would say when you rush into a room for a meeting and everybody's in action mode.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, good. So, and I'm going to ask you, rather than saying you, to say I.
Yes.
Yeah. By the way, for all of us, oftentimes we say, yeah, you know what it's like. You run into a room and this person's saying that, and then you start to feel this way. When we say you in that way, we actually remove ourselves from our experience. And the first thing we're going to need to be able to do to develop our capacity for leadership agility in the way we're talking about it here is to be able to be present with our experience. And we can't do that when we use these strange language constructs like you. I walked into a room.
I walked into that room.
Yeah. So when you walk into the room, by the way, what I'm going to be doing with Tamara is what I recommend that we start to do more with ourselves, which is to, in a sense, kind of analyze or to look at the anatomy up close as to what's happening. Because to the degree that we can increase our awareness of what our experience is in a given moment, we gain access to shifting that experience, or to say more precisely, to shifting the sense making or the meaning making by which our experience gets constructed. All right. So what happened? You walk into this room. I'm kind of like on pins and needles. I can't wait to hear what happened.
Yeah, when I walk into that room, and I feel there's a lot of rush, and I'm rushed myself, and people start looking at me for answers and solutions.
Yeah, what happens? What thoughts, what feelings get triggered in that moment, right in that moment in you?
That I want to I want to prove myself. Yeah.
And what would you say is the belief, the you could say subconscious belief, or you could just say the belief in the background, such that you have a concern called, I need to prove myself?
That I'm never good enough.
Yep. Good. So we're not going to go deeply into this. If we were in a workshop, we would go much more deeply into this. How many, raise your hand if you can relate to what Tamara is saying in some way for yourself. All right, good. So it's always the case that in the background, there is some set of beliefs, assumptions, theories, stories that give rise to our experience. And it happens in a microsecond. We don't notice it. And we find ourselves dancing to that belief. Now, to be in a sense and respond mode, see, all of that stuff, all of those beliefs are there to help us, to help prevent us from having to experience anxiety. It prevents us from having to experience the feeling we have when we don't know what's going on, that sense of confusion, that sense of anxiety, that sense of fear, that sense of just uncertainty. And so being in a sense and respond mode is that we're able to be in the presence of that uncertainty, that unknown, even our own confusion, and to be able to proceed in a way that is aligned with what we're committed to, what we, our sense of purpose as it relates to the current moment. So thank you, Tamara. That was very helpful and useful. Yeah. Who else? What did you come up with? By the way, I may or may not necessarily go in as much with everybody as I just did with Tamara. So who's next? Raise your hand and.
Hi, I'm Raven. Can I go?
Way to go, Raven. Is that how I say your name?
Yes, it is.
Do I pronounce it differently?
No, it's spot on.
Okay, great, Raven. All right, and thank you, by the way. I love that you got my attention very forcefully.
So I want to thank Tamara for sharing and being vulnerable with us. I can totally identify with what you're saying. I think for me is competing priorities brings about that stress in me, and then I want to predict and plan.
Right, great.
When you say, for example, you have two projects and there's certain aspects of the project that need to get done at the
Wait. I'm going to slow you down a little bit, Raven. I'm going to slow you down. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, so let's start. So you said that competing demands.
Correct.
Right. So incidentally, I wanted to slow Raven down, both for the sake of Raven, but also for the sake of our own learning. Because here's what happens. When we reflect on our experience, we go into a kind of a record groove. Remember old LP records? Anybody here remember old LP records? You know, sometimes the record would be playing and then it would be like it would hit a skip, like it would go, And I would submit that every one of us falls into a kind of a record groove when we reflect on our own experience, because we're still being defined by those beliefs and stories that are running in the background. So Raven started to go into this long, by the way, can I playfully be provocative with you, Raven? Is that all right?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay, good, good. Because I'm pointing to something with Raven that we all do, which is that we go right into our story. And it's like a runaway train. Try to stop that train. Really hard to do. So what I did is I stopped that train with Raven, right? So let's come back to where this train got stopped, which is you said something about competing demands. So say more. So you're try to come to a moment where that actually happened, right? And say what it is about this competing demand thing.
Sure. So my example was early in my career when I was getting started in my Agile journey. I was working for a company that believed that everything was a priority, and therefore it was hard to prioritize. And so I found myself as at that time a project manager, where I was trying to do a little bit of everything, but I felt like we weren't making a big impact.
And you felt like you were not making a big impact.
Correct.
Right. So again, if we were in a more of a workshop setting, we would take more time to unpack this, but I'm going to run the film forward. You know, I'm going to move the cursor on the video a little bit further forward. And I'm going to suggest that, and this is going to be kind of provocative. I'm going to suggest that this is something that you do much of the time. And by the way, this is something that many of us do, that we allow ourselves to be dominated by a condition that we walk into in an organization. In this case, that everything is prioritized. And we know that we're ineffective, but we keep doing it anyways. Does that resonate for you, Raven?
Yes, it definitely, that's not the case now. I've learned the act of self-preservation
Yes.
and awareness. And so that's not the case now, but yes, I do.
Yes, good. So, and at one point it was the case, right? And what shifted for you such that that's no longer the case?
I think it took some time for me to learn my way through being an Agile coach, understanding what the Agile mindset means, being confident in my ability and my skill set to be able to push back to say either no or not yet.
Right. Good. So would you say then that, okay, great. I was going to go someplace, but I've decided not to in the interest of time. Thank you, Raven. I think we have time for one more person. So again, the question is you falling into a kind of a predict and plan mode when the moment is calling for is sense and respond. So one other person, raise your hand. Now I may not be able to see you. So if you want to get in, I don't know if Murad, if you can help us see who might be raising their hand.
Yeah, I have a look. If I can see any hands.
Shaheen. I think Shaheen wants to.
Okay, so Shaheen, you already had a turn, so I want to let somebody else get a chance.
Somebody else? Anyone else?
Oh, come on.
Barbara.
Hi, Michael. This is Barbara.
I'm trying to find, where are you?
I'm here.
Okay. Oh, there you are. Okay, good.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi, Barbara.
And I just have to say, I know you and you know me, and I'm really bad with names, but I did the training with you in Boston. So
okay.
I just found out over Sandeep. But the question which comes in my mind and also in our discussion before, isn't that also a question of personality? If you go in the predict and plan and modes, if you look at the Myers-Briggs, isn't that also perceiving, and I don't know if this fits now here, but isn't it also a kind of personality trait question
So
for oneself?
Yeah. So I'm going to be a bit provocative,
Yeah.
and this is really for everybody else. So I want to, so the nature of that question, what it could do if I were to follow it is we would pull us into a kind of an intellectual conversation, and which is not a bad conversation to have. And there's something in many of us that part of how predict and plan manifests itself is to want to try to find a definitive answer for something. So my short response to that question is that yes, it may have something to do with personality. And in what way would that have to do with your personality, Barbara?
This is a question now. Because I always struggled with the predict and plan stuff. That's why I really struggle with this two opposite, as two parts, and that's why even in our small group discussion, I always was like thinking, you know, this predict and plan. I always experienced it more from outside and not from my side. So that caused a little confusion for me.
Right. Right. So I would suggest to you that confusion arises from the expectation of being able to understand what's going on around you.
Mm-hmm.
It's a form of predict and plan, right? So the expectation that I can understand, everyone else listen up, because many of us do this as well, right? We have the expectation that we should understand something. Now, where personality comes into all of this is we just have different styles for dealing with the upset that arises when we find ourselves confused. The experience of confusion arises from the expectation that things should be known and things should be knowable, specifically by me. And when it's not that way, confusion sets in, which is a form of upset, which is a form of reaction to an unpredictable event or an uncertain event, right? So that very confusion is the experience of a VUCA world. Now, the question I have for you and for anybody else who can relate to this, what would it be like to allow that confusion to exist and still be able to be in that moment? Do you want to say something to that, Barbara? I have to let my dog out of the room. Hold on. You want to say something to that, Barbara?
No, sorry. My partner just came in and I was disrupted. Sorry. But perhaps somebody else can answer.
Anybody else have something to that? Want to speak to that? Jenny, I see your hand up. Jenny Pearson.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Barbara.
When I first started my job as an Agile coach, I didn't know much about Agile, really. I was just kicked into it, and I found it that how I'm gonna be able to work in that condition. I also tried to make it predictable what everybody needed and such things.
Yeah.
And that was the expectation also, that I were going to have all the answers. But I think that with more and more knowledge, I can sit back and take it more like it comes and goes, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
So I think now I'm better anyway in allowing that.
Yes. So I want to say something to that, and it's always going to be the case that we get better at dealing with known uncertainties, known unpredictability. See, the high bar for sense and respond is our capacity to be present with the unpredictability that's unpredictable. So we get used to the existence of certain unpredictabilities and uncertainties, right?
Mm.
And that's simply an adaptation.
Mm.
We don't know necessarily that there's been an upgrade in our inner capacity for sense and respond. We don't know necessarily. So the question, and I'd invite us all to hold that as a question, not as a self-accusation or anything like that, but just as a question.
Mm.
You know, it's a place of authenticity to be in the question, like, you know, because it's natural for us as human beings to want predictability and all that kind of stuff. So this is all we're doing right now is just opening up a question for us, a place for us to look authentically. So what I'm going to suggest, Moret, is that I think we should move to the next part, right? And what I'm
looking for my audio. Yeah. I suggest that too, that we move on and have another round of conversation on what we've heard so far, a short round of conversation in breakout rooms, and then get to the wrap up.
Yeah, so here's what I would invite you to do in this next breakout, is to start to look at what's one of the things that what's one way in which that sort of predict and plan gets manifested in me. We've examined a couple of different examples very briefly. What would be my way? Like maybe I get confused. Like for me, I get confused, right? Other people get anxious. Other people want to suddenly move into control mode. So what is it for you? Use this as an occasion to kind of look for yourself. And there are common patterns among people. So you may find that one other person's pattern is similar to your own. And again, this is just kind of like an open question. No, you know, you're not trying to get to any place definitive here. How much time do we have, Moret?
We'll have 10 minutes, so like two rounds, just like the last time. But first, one minute for everyone to think individually. I give you 1 minute, and then we get into the breakout rooms. I will start the time now so that you can make your thoughts on the question that Michael just gave us, and I will also put the question in the chat. I hope I got it. Michael. I hope I got the question right.
Yeah.
And what's one way that predict and plan gets manifested in myself?
Very nice.
Based on what we just talked about. And I will start the time now. Please get to an end. Finish your thought, finish your writing, and then Christian will move you to the breakout rooms. I just post the structure and the question in the chat if my MacBook will allow it. So here we go. Here you have the structure, and you will again have to time box yourself. We will have 2 rounds again, only one person talking at a time. The others will listen carefully. 2 rounds to refine, and please mind the time box in your breakout rooms. It will help you with the time. So see you in 10 minutes. Have fun.
Okay, so welcome back. So what I'd like us to do now is you may have maybe something that happened during this last round. And I'd like to open it up just to other questions. There were some questions in the chat room. And so we'll kind of open it up, not maybe into a general Q&A, but just, you know, find out what other questions are there. And then I'll say 1 or 2 other pieces. And then, bye, Barbara. Yeah, thanks for letting us know. Nice to see you. Cool. So let's just go to some questions. Who has like a general question, or do we have any in the chat
We
window?
have a question in the chat from Andreas from one of the previous rounds. And it's, what would have happened if we would have never learned predict and plan?
Oh, okay. And where is Andreas still here? Because I want to talk with you directly. I would prefer that. Are you here somewhere? Am I just
Yeah,
not?
here he is. He's already unmuted.
Andrea, okay, there you are. And I see a black screen, Andrea.
Yeah, coming.
Okay, good. All right, there you are. Andreas, good. All right. So can you say your question just so I can kind of like interact with you?
I mean, it's from the very first round of your talk.
Sure.
Where we said, okay, kind of, how do we get around this planning thing? And I thought, okay, what if we would have been in the lucky, from my perspective, lucky situation, never to have been working in a company which were doing plan and resolve. You know, when you always have been in a agile by nature company where you maybe never experienced plan and resolve. Because my thought is that this is all something we learned, and the question is, can we unlearn it? Or what would have happened if we never would have learned it?
So I'd like to suggest a different way of thinking about it, Andreas. So I would suggest that predict and plan is not something that we learned like in grade school. And it's not even necessarily something that is imposed upon us by the like the heavily predict and plan organizations we find ourselves, that we were already born into a predict and plan way of thinking, a predict and plan way of existing in the world. And that we, if we didn't have predict and plan, where do you think predict and plan organizations come from, by the way? They come from people like you and me, that to some degree, we're going to, even if we move into an agile organization, again, I know that I'm being somewhat provocative perhaps, that if we move into a so-called agile organization, we're going to turn it into some form of predict and plan to the degree that our own inner operating system is running a predict and plan sort of program, if you will. And for the most part, we as human beings, we woke up, we got born into a metaphysical stance. I'm going to use a philosophical term if you don't mind. We got born into a philosophical stance, which we can call predict and plan. It's a stance that prefers predictable events, prefers certainty, prefers understanding what we're dealing with. It just naturally prefers that, right? So it's not like the organizations we go into made us become predict and plan. Those organizations got created by the same predict and plan mindset as we did.
I can agree with you. Looking about cultural involvement, evolution, etc. I'm now thinking more in direction of holacracy, etc., where they did outgrow this in a way, from my perspective.
Yep. So what I would say, and then I'll go to another question. What I would say to all of that, Andreas, is that we could do all of those things until the cows come home. And unless something shifts in us, we're going to turn whatever we do into some predict and plan version of it. So I've seen plenty of holacracy implementations that were totally predict and plan, that operate. It's always going to operate on the inner operating system. That's the point. That's a big point here. Cool. Are we cool, Andreas?
Okay.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. What's the next? Where's our next question?
The next question is from Jan, and he brought a question from their group conversation. Do you see gender-specific approaches to predict and plan and failure of this? And David already replied, so a little discussion started. She doesn't think predict and plan is a question of gender in a biological sense, but maybe stereotypes.
Okay, Jan, so what do you have, where do you land in all of that?
It was just the conversation that we had, and we were 2 women and 2 men, and it appeared that the women and the men were kind of had opposable views to this and reacted stereotypically, and in what we expressed in our thoughts. And thus the question, is that something that you see from your experience, that there is gender-specific reaction and approach to predict?
So if we were in more of a workshop, I would want to find out more what happened in your interaction.
Okay.
And but because we're not, and because we do have a clock that's sort of defining our life right now to some degree. We are determined by a clock, the predict and plan world of a clock. And but what I would say is perhaps. And there's something in me that doesn't want to necessarily come up with a definitive answer to that. And I would say perhaps that perhaps yeah, I don't know. I think because I'm still really intrigued by what happened, that there was this, and again, if we were in a workshop, and this is something we're going to get into when we dive into the relationship part in session number 3, which is what happens in relationship systems. For instance, what's the nature of the oppositions that form in relationship systems, and how can we come to understand that? Because oftentimes what we do in today's world is we try to smooth over oppositions. And I like to amplify them in order to find the truth that is inherent in both poles. And so I would say it's a both and, that yes and. So yes, the feminine deals with predict and plan in a different way than the masculine. Notice the way that I'm phrasing that term. Not necessarily about people, but about an energetic nature of different gender energetic approaches, right? So I know that's might have been a bit of a discombobulated response to your question.
No, thank you. That's just perfect.
Is it?
Yes, it is.
Oh, awesome, Jan. Thank you for that. Let's see, how are we doing? I feel like I should bring this to a close, an orderly close. So I want to just, actually, I don't think we need to go into that, the territories business, Maret. I just want to say that one of the things that I am partnering with Holisticon is we're working on creating some way to take this work deeper. And we'd love to hear from you if you have some ideas as to where you would want this to go. What might be useful for you or for the people around you if we were to go into this work more deeply. And you may not have enough to go on right now, but if you have an inkling, share your thoughts with somebody at Holisticon. And part of my commitment in a kind of COVID and post-COVID world is to create a way of having learning environments that really serve people. All right. So is there anything else that we want to say before we close, Maret? Anything else that we should do?
Actually, we couldn't tackle all questions now, but they're
Yeah.
really interesting, and I guess we'll come together and see how we'll find a way to answer these questions. Not right now, but maybe afterwards.
Yeah. So can we I just want to go around the room. Can you put a thumbs up if you found this session interesting, compelling, even disturbing? Something, something that, yeah, just so we can get a sense how this is landing for people. Yeah, great. Thank you. And there are some empty screens, so I'm not sure what that means. By the way, this is not really for the sake of voting, but we want to just we're really committed to bringing this kind of work out in ways that serve you, and so we want to know how we can do that.
I also saw hands clapping.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Okay. Well, so boy, I sure wish we had another hour or so. And that's something that we're working on, is creating something where we actually have more time to really dive into this stuff. And I hope that you come to the next session and all of the sessions. So thank you very much.
So Michael, what will we dive into in the next session? Maybe you can give us
yeah, good. Yeah. So in the next session, we're actually going to continue what we started here, to start to dive into the inner operating system. So Shaheen asked the great question, what's between sense and respond? And what's between there is pretty much everything, and which is the inner sense making that determines what we're able to sense and what seems to be a reasonable, quote unquote, response. And so we're going to dive into that sort of inner operating system, and I'll share with you some ideas and concepts from the research of adult development. And then we'll do some work with you and to get deeper into the anatomy of our own kind of meaning making, and how we can become perhaps a bit more aware of that, the beliefs, the assumptions, the theories, the stories that determine how we make sense of our world. So that's next session.
Yeah, so thank you, Michael, for giving us a little preview of that. And thank you also for taking your time and being with us and diving into this intense dialogue and discussion, and also for your valuable input.
Great. Thank you, Marit. And thank you, Christian, and everybody else at Holisticon. And thank you, everybody who is here. Really wonderful to see your faces.